few days before Thanksgiving 1965, the United States Army became engaged in one of the biggest battles of the Vietnam War. It was a battle that brought the United States deeper into Vietnam and set the U.S. strategy for how the war was to be conducted. A war of attrition. Bleed the enemy to death. The problem, what to do when the enemy is willing to bleed to win. After almost 3 days of no sleep, the 2nd Platoon of Alpha Company 7th Cavalry, under the command of 2nd Lieutenant Gordon Grove, was ordered out of the perimeter early on the morning of the 16th. What they found were hundreds of dead soldiers from the People's Army of Vietnam, commonly known as the NVA. The soldiers had been killed by airstrikes and artillery that had ringed the perimeter of Landing Zone X-Ray. The Americans found nothing of any live enemy in the area, and they returned safely to the perimeter. In 1965, the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Harold G. Moore, air assaulted into Landing Zone X-Ray at the base of Chu Pong Mountain, located in the valley of the Ia Drang, a suspected North Vietnamese base camp. After 3 days of hard fighting, some of it hand-to-hand, the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, and Bravo Company, and 3rd Platoon Alpha Company 2-7 flew out of the landing zone, with 79 killed in action, 121 wounded, and inflicting an estimated 1,215 enemy dead. They were reinforced by 2 battalions of the 5th and 7th Cavalry. On the morning of November 17th, 3rd Brigade Commander Colonel Tim Brown gave a briefing to his 2 battalion commanders left on Landing Zone X-Ray, Lieutenant Colonel Robert McDade, commander of 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry, and Lieutenant Colonel Robert Tully, 2nd Battalion, 5th Cavalry. Brown said Colonel Tully was to lead the way out of X-Ray toward Landing Zone Columbus, with McDade's 2nd of the 7th following. McDade would then split from the 5th and move toward another landing zone, codenamed Albany, further to the northwest.
Carry out your order, gentlemen, sir. Sir?
Second Lieutenant Grove's 2nd Platoon was again out among the first to leave the perimeter on the same morning 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry left Landing Zone X-Ray. As they moved into the area they had scouted the previous day, they found the hundreds of dead North Vietnamese soldiers had disappeared. And the question arose from one of the troopers, where did all the dead go? Another soldier showed his apprehension to what they were moving into by announcing, "This is bad." On the left flank of Alpha Company in 2nd Platoon, a young sergeant named John Eade realized the usual air cover of gunships was no longer flying overhead.
I don't know. Maybe they don't want to give our position away.
This was unusual for a unit to be alone in enemy territory without air cover overhead in the way of aerial rocket artillery. 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry continued to march to the north until they came to a predetermined position on the map and split from the 5th Cavalry. They continued to the northwest toward their intended landing zone, Landing Zone Albany. A flight of B-52s was scheduled that morning to bomb the Chu Pong Mountain, where the headquarters of the NVA was located. The 2 battalions left at X-Ray had to be at least 2 miles away from the impact area. When the bombing commenced, the shockwaves could be felt and seen by the men of the 2-7 that were moving through the jungle. One soldier described it as feeling the ground roll under your feet. The men in the lead of Recon Platoon came across many enemy shoe tracks, grains of dropped rice, and bamboo arrows pointing the direction the enemy was to take. These signs of enemy activity in the area caused more concern in many of the men. Around 11:55, Recon Platoon Leader, 2nd Lieutenant Pat Payne, and his platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Ron Benton, walked forward in the center of the wedge formation and passed by a couple of large anthills. Suddenly, to his right, Lieutenant Payne noticed an NVA soldier hiding. He quickly jumped on top of him, grabbing him, shouting and alarmed. 10 yards away, Sergeant Benton found another enemy soldier and grabbed him as well.
Radio.
Lieutenant Payne quickly deployed his platoon into a defensive perimeter arc 5 yards out and radioed Colonel McDade.
6, over. Sir, Recon platoon caught 2 POWs up front.
Command group, follow me.
Specialist 4 Bob Tolles recalled that their company had flank security at 30 yards distance from their platoon.
Oh, everybody, sit down, take a break.
When a break was called, he remembered another soldier asking him,
Are those our flankers over there?
if this was the
Yeah,
case,
looks like-
then they could then catch their breath and relax under the safety of their flankers, something they had not been able to do for 3 days. Executive Officer of Alpha, 1st Lieutenant Larry Gwynn, was alerted by radio of another halt ahead. Lieutenant Gwynn ordered his men to rest while he walked forward to find out what was happening. Colonel McDade finally reached the head of the column and began his own interrogation of the prisoners. The idea of these fresh-looking troops being deserters troubled Captain Sudinis.
The PWs at X-ray said they had bad morale, bad food, low morale. These guys are saying there are 8 or 10 up in the wood line, up in the trees, ready to fight to the death.
In the headquarters section, the same need for rest was also being felt and eagerly accepted. Many men had been carrying very heavy equipment, not usually packed through the jungle.
Any idea what they're doing up front?
I have no idea. Maybe they ran into water again.
Well, we'll probably be doubling back again.
Yeah. Just like I always said, we're like sled dogs. If you're not the lead dog, the view never changes.
PWs had plenty of water.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Captain, what are they doing up here? We're at least 3 miles from X-ray.
Captain Joel Sugdinis' reply to Lieutenant Gwynn was that the enemy prisoners said they were deserters, which he doubted. Gwynn thought they were pretty well armed for deserters. Captain Sugdinis also said he thought he had seen another enemy soldier run off into the jungle up ahead. An uneasiness settled over them. At the very rear of the column as rear guard for 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry was Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Cavalry, under the command of Captain George Forrest. He received word from McDade's command that all company commanders were to come to the front of the column at once for a briefing on what was going to be done next. The time was 1:07 p.m. The recon platoon was making its way across the first open area in Landing Zone Albany, moving toward an island of trees in the center. Lieutenant Gwynn moved forward to the edge of the landing zone where Captain Sugdinis had taken up a position to deploy Alpha's 1st and 2nd platoons. The 1st was to the east, or right flank, and the 2nd to the west, or left flank. Just then, Colonel McDade and his headquarters staff walked right past the two Alpha Company officers and out into the landing zone toward an island of trees in the center of LZ Albany.
Sergeant, go, so this is the LZ. We're gonna move left and establish perimeter security. Right.
The stage had been set for one of the bloodiest battles of the Vietnam War. The perimeter was being secured by platoons on each flank.
Company to secure this area, and I want Delta Company to hook up with Charlie Company over beyond me. Move out.
The rest of the companies in the column were now spread out for over 500 yards and were in rest mode with various degrees of flank protection.
Private, I need you to go 50 yards behind me.
As ordered by Captain Sugdinis, 2nd Platoon of Alpha Company began its deployment for perimeter defense on the left flank of the landing zone.
Start here. One man, 10 to 15 meters apart. Stay alert. Keep it spread out.
Sergeant John Eade, being the end man of the platoon, was ordered to watch to his left and link up with Charlie Company.
Stay alert. Let Carabella know as soon as you see Charlie Company coming up.
Captain Forrest, being the furthest from the head of the column, was just arriving at the head of the column to attend McDade's battalion briefing. The recon platoon, led by Lieutenant Payne, moved across the clearing on the far side of the island of trees. Most of the troopers had made it across the landing zone. Lieutenant Payne and his headquarters section were midway between the far jungle and the island of trees when a shot was heard. Spec 4 Dick Ackerman, a few yards to the right of Lieutenant Payne, remembers hearing firing to his right and rounds flying by him and his squad. They all went to the ground for cover.
Report to the battalion, we're taking fire to our front.
Battalion, this is Recon 6. You're taking heavy fire from the front.
You two stay here.
We're under heavy fire.
Captain, I want to be able to have permission to bring recon platoon back to the trees so they're better field of fire.
Roger that. Take off. Skill train 6. Skill train.
Fine, hands set.
Squads, all recon squads, this is Recon 6. Listen up. What we're gonna do,
On the count of 3, move back across the LZ.
all recon, here we go. 1, 2, 3, go, 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 go!
When the call to fall back was given to all squads from Lieutenant Payne, Palmer ordered his men to fall back while he covered them. Palmer was later found dead, with a bullet through the head and a jammed cartridge in his rifle. He died doing what he had always done, taking care of his men.
Go!
As the firing on the right flank began, those members of the command group that were in the center of the landing zone began taking fire from the rounds fired at the 1st platoon on the right flank of the LZ. Sergeant John Eade remembered wondering where their helicopter aerial rocket artillery cover was.
Somebody put a grenade into that anvil!
While Spec 4 Wilbert Johnson laid down cover fire, Sergeant Eade moved forward. Delta Company in the column were resting and awaiting orders to move when they began to hear firing up ahead of them. They took up positions and waited for their flankers to fire and fall back to them. They never did. Instead, it was the NBA coming through the jungle towards them. In the column, Charlie Company was beginning to take fire as the attack moved from north to south. Lieutenant Bob Jeanette's Charlie Company mortar platoon was also in the column. Lieutenant Jeanette's commander, Captain John Fessmer, who was located with the command group in the landing zone, radioed the lieutenant orders for him to form a skirmish line and move north to make contact with the enemy.
Form a skirmish line right through here. Move out.
Further to Jeanette's north, Lieutenant Don Cornett also received orders from Captain Fessmer to move forward to attack. Charlie Company walked right into the full force of the attacking NBA, which was attacking the right flank of the column. Lieutenant Cornett and his Charlie Company troopers fell in a hail of enemy fire, following orders and taking the battle to the enemy. Captain Ken Weitzel, who was along the edge of the LZ with others from the headquarter group that had come forward, heard the rifle fire as well.
Must be those snipers those two were talking about. You guys see where it's coming from? I'll pop up. If you guys see them, take them out. Ready? They're all over us! Get out of here!
Make it to those trees?
I think so.
Let's go.
At the very rear of the column, 2nd Lieutenant Larry Hess and PFC Vincent Locatelli began moving forward when they heard the firing. Staff Sergeant Fred Kluge got the men up and moving when he heard the shots. A mortar round then hit right behind the lieutenant and private, killing them both.
You're gone.
Sergeant Kluge ordered his men to take cover and form a defensive perimeter. When Lieutenant Enrique Pujols heard the firing up ahead, he went right to the radio for information. Later, he remembered hearing about that the front of his company was under heavy fire. He could hear over the radio grenade blasts and screams, so he ordered his squad leaders to get their men ready. Captain Fessmer contacted Lieutenant Pujols and ordered him to maneuver his platoon to the right. A few seconds later, another call came to hold in place. Pujols tried to find out what was happening, but all he received in reply was, out.
Specialists.
In order to find out what was happening, Lieutenant Pujols moved north to find Lieutenant Jeanette.
Right over there, sir.
As Lieutenant Pujols moved forward, he was suddenly hit in the foot and the thigh. He went down in extreme pain, just as the Battle of LZ Albany began erupting around him and his men. Lieutenant Alley and his men began hearing the firing that was beginning to engulf Charlie Company ahead of them.
We gotta get in line here. All right, read.
He deployed his men and was soon under fire from the NVA attack that was sweeping down the column. In the island of trees, located in the center of the LZ, the battalion commander and his company commanders were all on the radio, trying to make sense of all that was now happening in the column. Recon platoon was beginning to enter into the little island of trees in the center of the landing zone under cover fire from Alpha Company mortar platoon. They were then put into position around the perimeter and became the defensive line for the troops in the island of trees. The troopers tried to find the best cover they could from the intense fire coming from all around them. Captain Sugdinis and his executive officer, Lieutenant Gwynn, both looked back towards where they had been just a few minutes before, and they noticed 3 U.S. soldiers emerged from the noise and began running across the open ground towards them. Lieutenant Gwynn motioned for them to join him.
Over here. They're coming. Get in the back. Take a break.
I'm hit!
Lieutenant Jeanette and his mortar platoon, after dropping their heavy loads, moved through the tall grass and into the jungle. They began hearing fire to their front left. Lieutenant Pujols was fading in and out due to the morphine shot he had received. He was on the radio talking to his commanding officer, Captain John Fessmer. Fessmer had instructed him to mark his position with smoke to indicate his position to planes coming in for an airstrike.
636, white smoke.
When Lieutenant Cornett led his men into the jungle on his counterattack, Specials 4 Bob Tolles heard massive firing in their general direction just north of Delta Company. Out of the thick jungle, the NVA charged them. He fired into the first charging enemy soldier. Captain Sugdinis continued to try and get in contact with his platoons on the perimeter. He was interrupted by Lieutenant Gwynn yelling, "Here they come!" After a 550-yard dash back down the entire column under enemy fire, Captain Forrest finally made it back to Alpha 1-5. Eade had returned to the 2nd Platoon defensive line after knocking out a mortar group to their front.
Gary Owen! Gary Owen!
Good to see you too, Sarge.
What happened?
Everybody's either dead or wounded.
Are you sure?
We were charged and mortared. We beat them back, but there's not much left of us. Carbello's dead, radio's knocked out. Lieutenant Grove went back to the LZ. Maybe we should go too.
No, take me back to the CP.
There really is no CP. There's just the wounded.
No, let's go.
Lieutenant Bud Alley in the headquarters section tried to contact anyone on the radio, but could not because someone had keyed the mic.
Sarge, have you seen the other platoon?
No, sir.
3-3, let's go find the platoon.
Go!
Cease fire! Cease fire! We're shooting at our own men. Look up in the trees for targets.
Sir, Miller's platoon needs medical supply.
Lieutenant Jeanette crawled north to the next platoon who had radioed for more medical supplies. Realizing that they were now becoming cut off and surrounded, Lieutenant Jeanette ordered his men to circle up for defense.
Ed, I need a 360 perimeter around me now.
In the middle of the column, First Lieutenant Jim Lawrence of Delta Company was organizing Delta's position when he was struck in the helmet by a bullet and knocked out. Spec 4 Bob Tolles, after being wounded by an exploding rocket-propelled grenade, realized how desperate the situation was. He recovered and engaged the enemy, who was beginning to encircle his unit. After creating an opening in the encirclement with grenades and rifle fire, he returned to the wounded. Under the orders of Staff Sergeant Baker, he directed the wounded out of the kill zone and to their relative safety in the island of trees. Just as Bob Tolles and the other Delta Company survivors entered the island of trees, the already wounded Sergeant Baker was hit again, this time in the chest. Sergeant Baker continued urging Tolles to get the men to safety.
Barker, I want you to take care of these guys, make sure they got water.
Sergeant Eade realized that he was now the ranking sergeant left, and that 2nd Platoon was the only unit between the rest of the battalion and the enemy. He organized the survivors as best he could to protect the west flank of the LZ, as originally ordered, before the radio was knocked out. Lieutenant Jeanette's platoon was now in a 360-degree defensive position. He tried to contact his commanding officer about the situation and his position, but was soon wounded in the leg. In an exposed area of the perimeter, Jeanette's men began urging him to join them. One of his privates risked his life to save his lieutenant. This private, whose name is now lost to history, was killed doing his duty trying to save his commanding officer. With 4 wounded men cut off from all friendly forces and not knowing which way was safest, Lieutenant Alley began moving to the southeast to where he thought they would be out of the kill zone and safety. An airstrike forced them to turn south and away from the landing zone. As the survivors of Headquarters Company moved south, they stopped for a quick rest in a dry creek bed. One of the troopers asked Lieutenant Alley to say a prayer, which he did before they moved out. In an attempt to find the rest of 2nd Platoon, Sergeant Eade moved south to his original position.
It's clear, I got him.
How's it going over here?
Not good. No signs of Charlie Company or anyone. It's been fighting all over the place, but it's just recently gotten quiet. Sorry. Look south.
It's like that all over. Let's pull out.
Now inside the island of trees, Spec 4 Tolles took up a position on the perimeter with his friend, Private First Class Lester Becker.
Find out who that was.
All right, but stay in cover.
They heard moaning to their front, and Becker moved out to investigate. Becker crumpled to the ground, shot by a sniper. PFC Becker was carried off the field and was evacuated, but lost his fight for life in an Army hospital. Sergeant Eade and Spec 4 Wilbur Johnson returned to the 2nd Platoon command post area.
You guys stay here. I'm gonna head.
In order to try and link his platoon with the units to his right, he moved north to find Recon Platoon. What he saw was not recon platoon, but NVA all over their former position, firing on the island of trees. Marching from LZ Columbus to Albany, Bravo Company, 1st of the 5th Cavalry under the command of Captain Walter B. Tully, began arriving at Alpha Company, 1st of the 5th position at the rear of the column. Captain Tully met up with Captain Forrest and later attempted to move toward LZ Albany, but was repulsed by extreme fire from the enemy in the kill zone area.
It doesn't look any better to the north. Alright, this is what we'll do. We'll make sure these wounded can hold off another attack. Us four will move out south to a brush line I see, and we'll swing back around the NVA, pick them off one by one, and then we'll withdraw by twos. We're not in any kind of shape to get these wounded across the LZ. Besides, this is our position. We need to hold it. We don't want the company CP to get attacked. Go.
Eade and his squad moved west into the advancing NVA, attempting to attack the LZ from the west. They were able to set up hasty ambushes throughout the area and keep the NVA from launching a full-scale attack from this area.
Draw.
We need artillery at Alpha 100, Lima 100.
While the mortar platoon of Charlie Company was being ringed by artillery fire, Staff Sergeant Jesse Hernandez, a survivor of Lieutenant Cornett's counterattack, came into Lieutenant Jeanette's perimeter. After hearing that things were not good for the rest of the company, Lieutenant Jeanette continued his request for artillery fire around his position. Eade's squad came across a number of NVA resting in a clearing. The sergeant set his men up for another attack.
Come on, Sergeant, come on! Come on! I don't know, I just heard their phone. Go, 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 go!
After this initial ambush, Eade's squad took cover to rest and tend to Spec 4 Barry Burnite's wounds. This also allowed Eade to reconnoiter the area.
We need to fall back to the LZ. I'll cover us.
Barry's dead.
Let's please have some ammo and get out of here. Let's go.
The 3 remaining men of 2nd Platoon set up a triangular perimeter and awaited any further enemy movements.
It's open this way. Clear. So let's move through while we
Lieutenant Alley and his 4 wounded men began their 2-mile escape and evasion trek back to LZ Columbus, being very careful not to run into enemy patrols out in the front and to stay ahead of any tracking patrols following. They navigated to the LZ using the sounds of the artillery firing from Columbus into the Albany battle area. As Eade's squad redeployed to continue their flanking of the NVA, he was suddenly hit in the shoulder. Specialist 4 Johnson returned fire from where the shot came from, but was also hit.
What happened?
Johnson's dead. Don't worry, Sarge.
Sergeant Eade woke up with Specialist Barker dressing his wounds and informing him that they were the only 2 left.
Oscar, you can cut out. Head back to the company CP.
No, I got a right, Sarge. I'm staying.
Where they at?
Front right.
Specialist 4 Barker was killed fighting alongside his sergeant, defending the left flank of LZ Albany. Sergeant Eade, now alone, moved along the 2nd Platoon perimeter where he sat down to catch his breath. To the right, Eade heard a twig snap. Both Eade and the NVA soldiers fired at the same moment. Sergeant Eade found himself waking up, wondering what had happened. As he began to gather himself and his equipment, he realized he could no longer see out of his right eye, and he had a severe wound on the right side of his head. He was now alone, severely wounded, cut off from the battalion in the center of the LZ. At 6:30 that evening, the cavalry came to the rescue. Bravo Company, 2nd of the 7th Air assaulted into Albany with the help of the 229th Assault Helicopter Battalion. These brave pilots and their crews came in under heavy fire to deliver the already bloodied and battered 90-man Bravo Company who had fought at LZ X-Ray. That night, Flight Leader Major Will Bennett led 12 helos from Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie companies of the 229th. Sergeant Kluge was given the task by Captain Forrest to take 20 men and rescue the wounded with Lieutenant Jeanette. Some men volunteered immediately, while others thought of what a mission like that could mean. Sergeant Frank Nowski remembered the exchange he and his friend Rip had. Rip said to me, "If I was out there, I'd like someone to come after me." I thought about that and I said to him, "Yeah, I guess so." We both volunteered, as did 18 others.
We've got at least 12 wounded that are walking around out here executing. If you wait till morning, we won't be here. Over. Roger that. All right, man. There's a squad coming to us from the south. I'm gonna fire my pistol in the air. No shooting in that direction.
A few yards away, in the darkness, the remnants of 3rd Platoon, led by Lieutenant Pujols, tried to survive the night and escape the NVA execution squads.
Escape and evade if you can.
Still alive?
I don't know, I told him to leave.
Sergeant Kluge and his patrol continued on past Pujols' position to where Ghost 46 was.
Who's in charge here?
I am.
Wow, didn't think there'd be so many wounded.
Sergeant Kluge realized they could not take back all of the wounded. He informed Lieutenant Jeanette of his decision to leave their medic, Spec 4 Daniel Torres, with them. He promised they would come back in the morning. Ghost 46 reluctantly nodded and said, "Don't worry about me. Take as many as you can." Kluge and his men moved out with the men they could handle. Captain Forrest moved out in front of his line with the light on his face shining brightly in the dark. As the patrol began to move forward, a soldier who had been asleep and had not gotten the word of the patrol coming in awoke, and seeing shadows to his front, opened fire, emptying an entire magazine into the patrol. Luckily, no one was killed.
Hold your fire! Hold your fire! Hold your fire!
Sergeant Ski Noski, Spec 4 Perp Lavender, and another man were wounded. A member of the 229th Assault Helicopter Battalion that was on the ground at Albany was Captain Kenneth Weitzel, the liaison officer with the cavalry for the 229th. He was manning the radios and talking to helos coming in for another mission into the firestorm of Albany.
Roger, 3-1. You need to light up the LZ or mark where you want us, over.
6-3-1. Look for red light in LZ. Over.
Captain Weitzel was in contact with other pilots from the 229th Helicopter Assault Battalion that also flew in supplies and evacuated wounded from LZ Albany. Chief Warrant Officer Lee Komich remembered one of his 3 flights into LZ Albany. As he looked out ahead into the darkness towards his destination, he tried speaking into the mic but could not get a word out. He swallowed and cleared his throat and tried again. The danger these men faced and willingly flew into is a true testament to the courage of all who fought in this battle. Before touchdown, his crew chief saw a large log they were about to land on. He quickly warned Komich of this obstacle and was able to guide the pilot over it to a safer area. Smitty saved them all from certain disaster and allowed for the resupply of the men on the island of trees and evacuated at least 8 seriously wounded men. Other crew chiefs and gunners of the helos into Albany also risked their lives by jumping off their helos to help save wounded men they didn't even know.
Exit 3-1, this is Preacher, Yellow 3, over.
Axle 3-1, go ahead, Preacher.
Preacher, Yellow 3, flight of 2, inbound to landing.
Preacher 3-1, roger that. Look for red light for LZ, over.
Early the next morning, the remnants of Lieutenant Jeanette's band of wounded men were notified via radio that there was going to be a mad minute, a firing of all weapons along the perimeter inside the island of trees in LZ Albany. All men were to take cover. No one was hit in this exchange, which allowed the men from the perimeter to push out and rescue Jeanette's small perimeter of men. After a night of evading enemy and sitting on the edge of the LZ Columbus perimeter, the small group under Lieutenant Alley were welcomed into the perimeter that next morning, a few hours before another NVA attack on the Americans at this landing zone. To make sure that the NVA had left the area, the perimeter was ordered expanded. Captain Sugdinis joined this move to look for his 2nd platoon and any survivors. John Eade, in his platoon's command post area, was also found the next morning after he saw U.S. soldiers coming to him from the landing zone. He let out a very hoarse, "Gary Owen," and was reunited with his company commander, Captain Sugdinis. That next day, the men of the 1st Cavalry Division began the grim job of locating their dead comrades throughout the battlefield. Some described the area where the column was located as a long, terrible car wreck in the jungle. A Chinook helicopter was flown in to fly out those killed in this battle. The dead were gathered by their comrades and lovingly loaded onto the helicopter, which began their long journey home to their loved ones. The 350-plus men of the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry, and Alpha and Bravo companies of 1st Battalion, 5th Cavalry were at LZ Albany for 3 days, fighting and policing up their dead and wounded. They had been attacked by an overwhelming enemy force of over 1,100 enemy troops who attacked them while they were in column. Fighting was not like that at LZ X-Ray, where most of the enemy dead were killed by artillery and airstrikes. The men at Albany fought hand to hand with rifles, bayonets, grenades at close quarters with little cover from air and artillery due to the closeness of the enemy. Today, anyone wishing to visit and remember the brave men who gave their lives in the Valley of the Screaming Souls can visit their names at the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. Their names are on panel 3 east.